Alright, for this video I want to go through a sample beneficial ownership information report, or BOI report for short, and these are filed with FinCEN in connection with the Corporate Transparency Act. So in this scenario we're going to look at a foreign-owned single-member LLC that has to file this. So we've got the PDF version of the return here, which we'll go through. I've also got the FinCEN website open as well. And then lastly, just two slides. So one slide covering the basics on the CTA and what needs to be disclosed. And then the second slide covers the fact pattern, and we address some other filings that might be required. So if we start with some of the basics here, the Corporate Transparency Act is what now requires these filings. And so you can submit these filings one of two ways. So if you go to the FinCEN website and we're looking at BOI filings, you can download a PDF version of the report, prepare it, and then upload it to the portal, or you can just complete it online here within the web browser. In this scenario, we're going to be completing it in the PDF version, and so we'll validate, finalize, and then upload it to FinCEN. Now, before we get into the return, I want to cover some of these basics on the CTA. So the CTA is the Corporate Transparency Act, and this requires all reporting entities, so we have domestic reporting and foreign reporting entities, to report information about beneficial owners and company applicants to FinCEN. So we'll talk about those definitions a bit later, but first thing is always the filing deadline. So when do I have to submit these? Well, if you've got an entity that was set up before January 1st, 2024, your initial BOI report is due before January 1, 2025. So you have all of 2024 to get it submitted. If you have an entity that was set up in 2024, the BOI report has to be submitted within 90 calendar days after receiving notice that the entity was created. And then in year 2025 and later, your BOI report is due within 30 days of receiving that notice. Now, really important to remember here, this is not an annual filing. So once you submit your BOI report, you're effectively done, but you have to submit amended or updated returns in future years if there's any changes to your beneficial ownership or company structure. Now, what is a reporting company? So we have domestic or foreign. So domestic, think of it as any kind of company that's set up in the U.S. That's the general rule. So if you have a corporation, LLC, or other entities, so let's say a limited partnership, general partnership, if you're filing some document with the Secretary of State to get this thing opened, it's a reporting company. Now, the foreign reporting companies are any non-U.S. entities that have subsequently registered to do business in the U.S. So let's say you've got a UK company that's doing business in New York, and it registered to do business in New York. That is a foreign reporting company. Now, two things are reported here. We have the company applicants and then the beneficial owners. Company applicants, there are a maximum of two persons that could be reported, and the company applicant is the individual who directly files the document with the state to create the company. Now, if you have more than two persons performing this job, so let's say it's a law firm that has a staff of 10 that's responsible for overseeing all this, it really comes down to just that one person, that individual who's primarily responsible for directing or controlling the filing. In a lot of cases, the company applicant and the beneficial owner will be the same person. All right. Now, beneficial owner is one of two persons. So it's an individual who exercises substantial control over the company, or it's an individual who owns or controls at least 25% of the ownership in the reporting entity. So 25% ownership tests can be complicated, but it's relatively kind of straightforward. You can kind of pick out who these persons are. The substantial control test is way more vague, right? So if we look at some of the guidance that they publish on what is a substantial control, reporting companies have to disclose all individuals who have substantial control over the company, and there's no limit to the number of individuals who can be reported. So if you've got a large corporate structure and you have 50 people that arguably have substantial control, then maybe you have 50 persons that need to be disclosed. Now, some of these are more obvious, right? So senior officers such as the president, the CFO, general counsel, COO, CEO, those are pretty obvious. But down here, they use language which is a real, as they've noted, a catch-all, right? So who's an important decision maker? Who's a overall catch-all, right? Is somebody that exercises substantial control over the company in a different fashion that might not be listed here. So you really need to carefully assess who has substantial control over the company, and it's not necessarily an equity owner, right? Your title up here alone could mean substantial control, even though you could be the CFO and own no stock in the company. Doesn't matter. You still get listed as a beneficial owner. All right. So let's have a look at the fact pattern, and then we'll get into the return. So in our fact pattern, we have John Q. taxpayer, citizen and resident of the UK. He lives and works full-time in London, and he wants to open a Wyoming LLC where he's going to own 100% of the units. The entity is by default a disregarded entity for federal tax purposes, and John plans that all of his business and customers are going to be outside of the United States. So even though he's got no nexus to the U.S. other than just having this LLC, he still needs to file these BOI reports. Now, John is the one that personally visits the Wyoming website, and he files the articles of organization to create the LLC. The articles are approved on March 1, so John has to submit his BOI report within 90 days from March 1. John also files an SS4 to get an EIN for the company. And that's important. You want to make sure you've got that done before you go ahead and file the BOI. Now, John is both the beneficial owner and the company applicant in this fact pattern. So he owns 100% of the company. He is the managing member, so he directs all decisions that are made within the entity. And he's the applicant because he was the one that personally submitted these documents. Now, before we get into the BOI report, some other filings that you always need to consider because these likely apply to you. So the first one, if it's a foreign-owned entity, you have foreign-owned U.S. entities need to submit forms with the BEA. So the Bureau of Economic Analysis collects information on any foreign direct investment in the U.S. Now, most companies get an exemption, so they just have to file a BE13 exemption form, but might not apply to you, right? It really depends on your specific circumstances, so you might have to do something different. The other element is the annual Form 5472 with a Pro Form 1120. So for foreign-owned, disregarded entities, they have to file the 5472 each year to report those reportable transactions. Now, FBAR filings, not as common, but something that you still need to be mindful of. When you have an LLC, even though that's owned by a foreign person and it's a disregarded entity, the LLC itself is still a U.S. person for FBAR reporting. So if the LLC opens any non-U.S. account, so if John opened a UK bank account for his U.S. LLC, he might need an FBAR filing for that LLC as well. And then last is this U.S. TOB and ECI issue. So if you have your entity is engaged in trade or business in the U.S. and has ECI, a non-resident owner may need to submit a 1040-NR, or if the owner is a corporation, maybe an 1120-F. So really important to do the BOI filings, but be mindful of all this other stuff that you might have to be required to file. So let's have a look at the return, and we'll start getting into it. So this is the BOI report. It's only 4 pages, and so it's broken out into a couple of sections. So we have the home page, reporting company info, company applicant info, and then beneficial owners. Now, it could be more pages if you have to add more beneficial owners, more applicants, but in our case, it's going to be pretty straightforward for this example. Now, as you complete the form, when you're finished, you would validate and finalize to make sure everything looks good, and then you can submit it to FinCEN. So line 1, we have an initial report here. So we're not filing a corrected or updated report. And then in page 2, we have the reporting company info. So we've got Box 3, check. This is optional, but what we have done is we've asked them to assign us a FinCEN ID for this company, and we can use that in future years if we need to make updated reports or changes, if we have changes in beneficial ownership and we want to make those corrections. So we've got the name of the company, so the name of the LLC that John set up. We've got the EIN as the tax ID number. This was an entity set up in the U.S., and so we complete the domestic reporting company section. So it's a Wyoming LLC. Foreign reporting company information would apply if you had a non-U.S. jurisdiction up here, and then you would list that first state that you registered to do business within the U.S. Current address, we've got, he's got a mail forwarding address in Wyoming, so he's entered that there. And then in page 3, we input the information on the company applicant. Now, the existing reporting company, you check here if it was created before January 1, 2024. That's important because if you have an existing entity, you don't have to report the company applicant information. But in our case, we have an entity that was set up in 2024, so we have to. Now, the FinCEN ID, if you're a company applicant and you want to register with FinCEN in advance, you can register in advance, and then you would only have to input your ID here because FinCEN already has your information. If you don't register in advance, then you have to populate all these fields with your information. So John has not registered in advance, so he's just going to list all of his information as the company applicant. So he's got his name, date of birth, he's got his residential address here in London, and his form of ID, he's using his foreign passport, his passport's ID number, country of issuance, and he has attached a scanned copy of the pages for his passport. Right, that has to be included. Now, the last page, beneficial owner information, same thing with the FinCEN ID. If you've registered already, you can input your FinCEN ID, but in this case, John has not. So he has to input his information again because he's also the beneficial owner. So we've got John Doe, his date of birth, his address, and his ID information for his passport. Now, what's an interesting validation error here is you can't upload the same PDF, even though it's the same scan of his passport. So if you are both the company applicant and the beneficial owner, you just have to make 2 copies of that PDF and name it differently, and then it should validate correctly. Now, just to highlight some things that are not included. So as we scan through this, what you found is that, for one, the beneficial owner information, nowhere here do we indicate why he's a beneficial owner. We don't have to indicate how much ownership he has in the company. We don't indicate that he's a beneficial owner because he's a C-suite executive. You just have to list them as beneficial owners. You don't give reasons or amounts. The other thing we'll note is in the company information, as the reporting company, there's no financial information, right? So we're not disclosing assets, we're not disclosing income, we're not disclosing number of employees, we're not doing anything. The whole point of this is just to get at who are the individuals that have control over these entities. That's what FinCEN is after. All right, so that covers it for this reporting. Once you have this completed, then again, you can validate, finalize, and save it. And then if you visit the FinCEN website, you can submit the BOI Report PDF that you have completed, and then you're done, right? Then you're done until there's any changes that might happen in the future that require you to submit an additional BOI report. All right, so that covers it for this tutorial. Hope that was helpful. Any questions, feel free to leave a comment below, and I look forward to seeing you on the next one. Thank you.